Stop thinking you have a voice here. My husband runs this house, not you, Amelia said, her words cutting through the kitchen like ice. 23 years of sacrifice. Every bill, every repair, every sleepless night keeping this family together, reduced to nothing by my own daughter. I looked at her designer luggage by the door, the Hawaii tickets clutched in her manicured hands, and smiled. Have fun in Hawaii, sweetheart. When they returned a week later, tanned and entitled, their keys were as worthless as their arrogance. The person who built the house gets to decide who lives in it, and they gave me the chance to prove it. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Dad, thank God you're here, Sarah said as she opened the front door, looking frazzled. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and I could see the stress lines around her eyes that appeared whenever she was overwhelmed. We're a complete disaster. Flight's in 4 hours, and we haven't even started packing properly. I stepped inside, taking in the chaos. Clothes scattered across the living room like a textile explosion, suitcases half open on the floor, travel documents spread across the coffee table I'd helped them pick out last year. The familiar warmth of being needed washed over me. No problem, sweetheart. That's what I'm here for. Mason appeared from the bedroom, hair sticking up at odd angles, wearing yesterday's t-shirt that was wrinkled beyond salvation. He glanced at me, and something flickered across his face. Annoyance? Resignation? Whatever it was disappeared so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. Hey, he mumbled, his voice carrying that flat tone people use when they're forced to acknowledge someone they'd rather ignore. Then he immediately turned away from me, dismissing me without even a pretense of courtesy. Babe, where did you put my good sunglasses? Check the kitchen counter, Sarah called back, already heading upstairs. Her voice had that sharp edge of someone trying to manage too many things at once. Dad, could you help Mason with his suitcase? He's having trouble figuring out what to pack. The way she said it, like Mason was a child who needed supervision, made my chest tighten. But I pushed down the discomfort and found Mason standing over his suitcase like it was a puzzle designed to torment him. Need a hand? I asked, keeping my voice light. I've got it, he said without looking up, his shoulders rigid with tension. He grabbed a handful of shirts and tossed them in with the care of someone loading garbage into a truck. The expensive fabric crumpled immediately. He stared at the mess for a moment, then his jaw tightened. Actually, yeah, whatever. You can fold those. He didn't ask. He didn't say please. He gestured at the pile of clothes like I was hired help, then simply walked away. I felt heat creep up my neck, but told myself he was just stressed about the trip. I started folding his shirts, my hands working automatically while my mind processed the dismissal. These weren't cheap clothes. The tags I glimpsed showed prices that made me wince. As I worked, I couldn't help but think about the conversation we'd had 3 weeks ago when he'd asked if I could cover their mortgage payment again, his voice humble, almost embarrassed. Just until I get back on my feet, he'd said, looking me straight in the eye. You know how grateful we are. Dad! Sarah's voice carried from upstairs, bright and demanding. Can you grab our phone chargers from the kitchen and maybe pack some snacks for the flight? On it, I called back, feeling that familiar pull to fix, to help, to make everything easier for them. In the kitchen, I found myself moving through their space like a well-trained butler, gathering their belongings with practiced efficiency. Phone chargers, travel-sized toiletries, the expensive trail mix Sarah had mentioned liking last month. Mason reappeared as I was organizing everything in a neat pile, and he went straight to the refrigerator without acknowledging my work. He yanked the door open and stood there for a long moment, his posture radiating dissatisfaction. There's nothing good to eat in here, he announced to the kitchen at large, as if the refrigerator had personally offended him. You could grab something at the airport, I suggested, my voice carefully neutral. Mason straightened up and turned to look at me, really look at me, for the first time since I'd arrived. His expression was cold, measuring, like he was calculating exactly how much patience he needed to summon. We're not grabbing airport food. Sarah's already stressed enough without eating that garbage. The way he said garbage made it clear what he thought of my suggestion. I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. Of course, I could stop and pick up something on the way to the airport if you want. We're not going with you to the airport, Mason said, closing the fridge with deliberate force. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a slap. We'll take an Uber. I felt the words hit me like cold water. I thought that's why you asked me to come over early, so I could drive you. No, Mason said, his voice taking on that particular tone people use when they're explaining something obvious to someone slow. His eyes never quite met mine. We asked you to help us pack. The silence that followed stretched like a taut wire. I could hear Amelia moving around upstairs, the sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floors I'd installed 2 summers ago. Mason stood there, arms crossed, his posture radiating the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're about to win an argument before it even starts. His eyes had that flat, measuring look, like he was calculating exactly how much disrespect he could get away with. Right, I said slowly, feeling something cold and heavy settle in my stomach like a stone. Just to help pack. Mason's mouth twitched upward. Not quite a smile, but close enough to make my hands clench involuntarily. Exactly. We're capable of getting ourselves to an airport. The way he said capable dripped with condescension, like he was explaining basic life skills to someone particularly slow. I set down the phone chargers I'd been clutching, my movements deliberate and controlled. The plastic cases made a small clicking sound against the granite countertop, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly tense kitchen. I see. So when you called yesterday asking me to come over early, that was just for manual labor. Dad, what are you doing down there? Amelia's voice floated down from upstairs, bright and impatient. Her tone carried that particular quality of someone who expected immediate compliance. Are you getting those snacks packed? Mason's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something calculating crossing his features before settling back into cold indifference. He tilted his head toward the stairs, then back to me, like he was reminding me that Amelia was waiting. Look, he said, dropping his voice to that particular register men use when they want to keep women out of their business. We appreciate the help, but we don't need you micromanaging our lives. Micromanaging. The word hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. I felt my jaw muscles tighten so hard they ached. All those mortgage payments, $17,000 over the past 8 months, the utilities I'd covered when they were between paychecks, the groceries I bought because their refrigerator was always empty except for expensive beer and takeout containers. Micromanaging, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too quiet, too controlled. Yeah. Mason's confidence seemed to swell as he watched my stillness, mistaking my restraint for weakness. He uncrossed his arms and gestured vaguely around the kitchen, like offering to drive us everywhere, suggesting what we should eat, checking up on our plans constantly. We're adults, man. We can handle our own lives. The sound of Amelia's heels grew louder as she descended the stairs. I could picture her without looking, hair now perfectly styled, makeup applied with the precision of someone preparing for Instagram photos. When she appeared in my peripheral vision, she looked radiant, transformed from the frazzled woman who'd begged for my help an hour ago. What's taking so long? She asked, her voice carrying that bright, artificial cheerfulness people use when they sense conflict but want to pretend everything's fine. Her eyes darted between us, reading the tension with the skill of someone who'd grown up in a house where arguments simmered beneath the surface. Just having a conversation with your dad, Mason said, his entire demeanor shifting like a mask sliding into place. His voice became warm, affectionate, normal, the tone of a loving husband. The transformation was so complete, it made my skin crawl. I watched my daughter's face as she processed the scene. Her expression cycled through confusion, assessment, then something harder. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she looked at me, and I saw her make a choice in real time, husband over father. Everything okay? She asked, but the way she positioned herself, one step closer to Mason, her body angled slightly away from me, already announced her allegiance. Your dad was just offering to drive us to the airport, Mason said, his voice heavy with the kind of patience you'd use with an overeager child. I explained that we've got it handled. Amelia's face shifted, and I watched something cold slide behind her eyes. Her mouth tightened into that particular expression she'd inherited from her mother, the look that appeared right before someone got dressed down. "Dad," she said, her voice sharp with irritation. "We've talked about this. You need to stop treating us like children." When had we talked about this? The question blazed through my mind like a fire. I felt like I was standing on the outside of a conversation that had been happening around me, about me, without me ever knowing it existed. "I was just trying to help," I said, hearing how pathetic the words sounded, even as they left my mouth. Mason snorted, actually snorted, like I'd said something amusing. "That's exactly the problem," he said, his voice gaining strength as Amelia moved even closer to his side. "You're always trying to help. We can't make a single decision without you jumping in to fix something." I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to say something, to defend me, to acknowledge that my fixing had been the only thing keeping them from losing their house. Instead, she crossed her arms and nodded along with her husband like he was delivering wisdom instead of insults. "Maybe you should just go, Dad," she said, her voice cutting through the kitchen air like a blade. "We can handle things from here." The dismissal hit me like a physical blow. After an hour of folding their expensive clothes, organizing their belongings, scurrying around their house like some kind of unpaid servant, I was being sent away like a misbehaving child. "You know what?" I said, straightening up and looking directly at my daughter. "Maybe I should have an opinion about how things are handled. After all, I'm the one who—" "Stop thinking you have a voice here." Amelia cut me off, her words slicing through mine like ice. Her eyes had gone cold, distant, like she was looking at a stranger instead of the man who'd raised her alone for 15 years. "My husband runs this house, not you." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower, the rushing of blood in my ears. Mason's face spread into a slow, satisfied smile, the expression of someone who'd just won a battle they'd been fighting for months. I stared at my daughter. This person who had once been my little girl, who used to run to me when she was scared, who'd cried in my arms when her mother died. Now she was looking at me like I was some kind of intruder in a house I'd been paying for since the day they'd signed the papers. "I understand," I said finally, my voice steady despite feeling like my chest was being crushed. I looked around the kitchen one last time at the granite countertops I'd helped them choose, the stainless steel appliances I'd co-signed for, the breakfast bar where Amelia used to do her homework while I made dinner after 12-hour workdays. "Have fun in Hawaii, sweetheart," I said, forcing my voice to remain level. Mason stepped forward, his chest puffed up with the confidence of a man who'd just established dominance in his own territory. "Look, we're not trying to hurt your feelings," he said, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. "We just need some boundaries. Maybe when we get back, we can sit down and talk about realistic expectations." The word expectations hung in the air like a threat. I felt something inside me go very still, very cold. Amelia nodded along with her husband, her chin lifted with the particular arrogance of someone who believes they're being generous while delivering cruelty. "Of course," I said, forcing my mouth into something resembling a smile. "You two have a wonderful time. Really. You've earned it." I walked toward the door, each step measured and deliberate. Behind me, I could already hear them moving on. Amelia asking Mason about sunscreen, their voices light and relieved, like a problem had been solved, like an annoyance had been removed. As I reached for the door handle, I turned back one final time. They were standing close together now, united in their space, in their house, in their life that apparently had no room for the person who made it all possible. "Enjoy every minute of that vacation," I said, my voice warm and genuine. "You've both worked so hard for it." And I stepped out into the afternoon air, closing the door gently behind me, already planning exactly how I was going to teach them the true meaning of ownership. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before starting the engine, my hands gripping the steering wheel while something fundamental shifted inside me. The suburban street looked exactly the same as when I'd arrived. Neat lawns, quiet houses, the American dream packaged in vinyl siding and mortgage payments. But something had changed in those 10 minutes, like a lock tumbler finally clicking into place after years of being jammed. My phone buzzed with a text from Amelia. Thanks for helping today, Dad. Have a good week. I stared at that little red heart emoji, feeling my expression flatten into something colder. She had no idea what she'd just set in motion. Sometimes the smallest parts cause the biggest breakdowns. The drive home passed quietly, but my mind already working through possibilities like I was laying out tools before a complex repair job. Mason's smirk when he dismissed me. Amelia's cold eyes when she'd told me I had no voice. The casual arrogance of two people who'd forgotten that every system has weak points. You just need to know where to apply pressure. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, the shock had crystallized into something much more useful. Something with purpose. I walked into my empty house, the house I owned outright, every bolt and beam paid for, and felt the silence like a workshop after closing time. No ungrateful voices, no scattered messes, just clean space and the growing certainty that I'd been underestimating my own capabilities for far too long. I opened my laptop and pulled up my banking app, reviewing the numbers with the methodical attention I used to give broken locks. The story they told was more damning than I'd remembered. The down payment alone, $87,000. My retirement fund, liquidated to help my daughter achieve her dream of homeownership. Then 17,000 more in mortgage payments over 8 months. Another 4,000 in utilities, groceries, and emergencies that never got repaid. $108,000 to subsidize the lifestyle of two people who thought I was a nuisance they could dismiss at will. But it wasn't just the money. I pulled out the folder I'd kept with all their paperwork. Every document from the home purchase, insurance papers, the mortgage application where my signature had been the golden key that unlocked their loan approval. Without my credit score, my income verification, my financial backing, they never would have qualified for that house. The bank had been crystal clear about that. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Tom Richardson's number. We'd known each other since college, stayed close through careers and divorces and all the usual middle-age chaos. If anyone could help me understand the fine print of my situation, it would be Tom. "Still chained to your desk on a Saturday?" I said when he answered, keeping my voice casual and friendly. "You know how it is," Tom replied, exhaustion bleeding through his words. I could picture him in his office, probably surrounded by case files and cold coffee. "What's going on, buddy? You sound different." His tone carried that careful concern people use when they're trying to figure out if something's wrong. I could practically hear him leaning forward in his chair, lawyer instincts engaging. "Just had an interesting conversation with family," I said, settling into my chair and watching the sunset paint everything gold through my window. "I need some advice, though, hypothetically speaking." I let the word hang there, knowing Tom would understand the game we were playing. Say someone co-signs a mortgage for family members. Names on the deed belong to the family, but the co-signer is making all the payments. What happens if the co-signer decides they want some changes made? Tom's silence stretched long enough that I could hear him shifting papers, probably already pulling up legal databases. His lawyer brain was engaging. I could practically hear the gears turning, cataloging precedents and statutes. "That's a complex situation," he said finally, his words measured like he was building a legal argument. "The co-signer is legally obligated for the debt, but there are definitely options." "How hypothetical are we talking here?" "Very hypothetical," I said, watching a neighbor walk his dog past my window. Normal life continuing while I plan something extraordinary. And let's say this hypothetical co-signer is getting tired of being taken for granted. "Well," Tom said carefully, and I could hear the lawyer in him weighing every word, "the co-signer could demand to be released from the mortgage obligation, force the primary borrowers to refinance independently. Of course, if they can't qualify without the co-signer's backing, the bank would have to pursue other options. Eventually, yes, but here's the thing. Depending on how the paperwork was structured initially, the co-signer might have more leverage than they realize." His voice picked up speed as he warmed to the legal puzzle. "I'd need to examine the actual documents to give you specifics." I felt that familiar satisfaction of a mechanism working exactly as designed. All those years as a locksmith had taught me that every system had its pressure points. You just needed to know where to push. "I'll email you everything tomorrow." "Are you okay?" Tom asked, genuine concern creeping into his voice. You really do sound different. I'm fine, I said, my voice steady and controlled. Sometimes you just need to step back and look at a problem from a different angle. After we hung up, I made myself a proper dinner, not the rushed meals I'd been grabbing between running errands for ungrateful family members, and sat at my kitchen table with a green legal pad. I wrote down everything methodically, like documenting a repair manual, every payment I'd made with dates and amounts, every emergency they'd brought to me with tearful explanations and promises to pay back, every casual dismissal, every assumption that I'd always be there to fix their problems. The list filled 3 pages and grew more revealing with each line. Then I started a new list. This one was shorter, more focused. Contact information, account numbers, the mortgage company's customer service line, the property management firm handling their insurance, small details that someone might need if they were, hypothetically, looking into the ownership structure of a particular property. The next evening, my phone rang while I was reviewing Tom's preliminary response to the documents I'd sent him the night before. Amelia's name on the screen, calling from Hawaii. Perfect timing. Hi there, sweetheart, I said, injecting just the right amount of warmth into my voice. How's paradise? Dad, it's incredible here. The resort is amazing. Her voice carried that breathless excitement of someone posting their 3rd sunset photo of the day. Then her tone shifted, becoming softer, more careful. But I wanted to call and apologize for yesterday before we left. Mason and I talked it over, and we realized we might have been a little harsh. We were just stressed about the trip, you know? I leaned back in my chair, noting how her tone had shifted from dismissive to conciliatory. Amazing how quickly people recalibrated when they sensed something might be loose in the machinery. Her voice reminded me of someone trying to oil a hinge that had already been removed from the door. Lots of careful effort, no real understanding of what was broken. Of course, honey. Don't give it another thought, I said, letting my voice carry the exact warmth she needed to hear. Pre-travel stress gets to everyone. We really do appreciate everything you've done for us. The earnestness in her voice was almost touching, like she was trying to repair something she didn't even realize was completely dismantled. You know that, right? You're the best dad anyone could ask for. I know exactly how much I've done for you, I said pleasantly, making notes as she spoke. And I want you to have the most wonderful time in Hawaii. You've both earned it. The irony of that phrase was perfect. They had earned something. All right, just not what they thought. We will, she said, relief washing through every syllable. She thought a few sweet words and that heart emoji had fixed whatever damage had been done that afternoon. We'll definitely bring you back something special. That's very thoughtful of you, I said, already planning exactly what kind of surprise would be waiting for them. Take lots of pictures, make memories that will last. After she hung up, I sat in my quiet house feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Not satisfaction exactly, but the calm focus that came with knowing exactly which tool to use for exactly which job. They'd given me a full week while they sipped drinks with little umbrellas and posted photos of their paradise vacation, completely unaware that their world was about to require some major structural repairs. I opened my laptop and started crafting an email to Tom Richardson, attaching every document he'd need to understand the full scope of my situation. By midnight, I'd laid out a plan as precise as a blueprint, every step carefully measured and calibrated. Tomorrow would be busy. Phone calls to make, papers to file, mechanisms to set in motion. But tonight, I just sat in my kitchen, thinking about that moment when they'd try to use their keys on locks that no longer recognized their authority. They'd taught me something valuable today, that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and kindness doesn't guarantee respect. It was time to teach them a lesson in return. Tom's office hadn't changed much since my last visit 3 years ago. The same mahogany desk drowning in case files, the same diplomas hanging slightly crooked on cream-colored walls, the same coffee-stained mug that had probably been there since the Clinton administration. But Tom himself looked different as he spread my documents across his desk like a mechanic laying out engine parts. His usual easygoing demeanor had been replaced by the sharp focus he reserved for cases that actually mattered. This is... wow. he said, adjusting his reading glasses and tapping the mortgage application with his pen. The sound echoed in the quiet office like a countdown timer. His eyebrows had climbed halfway up his forehead as he read, and I could see him doing calculations in his head. I sat across from him in the leather chair that had molded itself to countless clients over the years, watching his face cycle through surprise, concern, then something that looked almost like admiration. Outside his window, the city moved at its usual Monday morning pace, people rushing to jobs, unaware that someone's entire world was about to shift on its axis. "Walk me through it," I said, keeping my voice steady and businesslike. Inside, I felt that familiar calm that came from watching a professional examine your work and realize it was more complex than they'd expected. Tom leaned back in his chair, which groaned under his weight like it was carrying the burden of bad news. He ran his hand through his thinning hair, a gesture I'd seen him make when he was about to deliver news that would change someone's life. "Well, the good news is you have significantly more leverage than most co-signers." He picked up the deed and held it toward the light, studying it like a blueprint. His fingers traced the signatures, and I could see the exact moment he understood the full implications. I felt something cold and precise click into place in my chest, like tumblers aligning in a high-security lock. "What kind of rights?" "The right to demand immediate refinancing to remove yourself from the obligation." Tom's fingers drummed against the desk with nervous energy, a rapid staccato that matched the quickening pace of my pulse. "If they can't qualify for a new mortgage on their own, which based on these income statements, they absolutely cannot, the bank has to pursue alternative solutions." The way he said absolutely cannot carried the weight of mathematical certainty. I watched his face as he flipped through Mason's employment records, noting how his expression grew more grave with each page. "Such as foreclosure, eventually. But here's where it gets interesting." Tom pulled out a yellow legal pad that was already covered in his cramped handwriting. I could see he'd been working on this since dawn, coffee rings marking where he'd set his mug while calculating my options. "There's another option that most people don't know about. As a cosigner with financial responsibility, you can petition the court to force a sale of the property to recover your investment." The words hung in the air like smoke from a perfectly executed controlled burn. I watched Tom's face carefully, noting how his expression had shifted from casual consultation to something more serious. His voice had dropped to that particular register lawyers use when they're explaining how to dismantle someone's life legally. "How long would that take?" I asked, feeling my own voice steady despite the electric anticipation building in my chest. "Depends on how cooperative they want to be." Tom's smile was sharp, predatory, the expression of someone who just realized his friend held all the cards in a game the other players didn't even know they were playing. "If they fight it, maybe 6 months. If they're smart and work with us, we could have this resolved in 30 days. I thought about Amelia's voice last night, full of sunshine and tropical breezes, completely oblivious to the fact that her paradise vacation was being funded by the very security she'd just told me I had no voice in. The irony was so perfect it felt like justice wrapped in silk. "What's the first step?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. Tom's eyes had that gleam lawyers get when they're about to unleash a particularly elegant legal maneuver. Tom reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a pre-printed form that looked official enough to change someone's life. His movements were deliberate, ceremonial almost, like he was handling a loaded weapon. "We file a formal demand for mortgage assumption release. Basically, we're telling the bank that you want out of the co-signing arrangement immediately, and they need to reevaluate the borrower's ability to carry the loan independently." He slid the form across the desk to me, along with a pen that felt heavier than it should have. The paper was crisp, clean, and I could smell the faint scent of fresh ink from the printer. "Once this hits their system, the bank has 30 days to respond. They'll contact Mason and Amelia, ask for updated financial information, probably require new credit checks." I picked up the form, feeling the weight of the decision in my hands. Tom was watching me carefully, his lawyer instincts alert for any sign of hesitation. And when they can't qualify, the bank will demand either immediate payment in full or... Tom's pause was deliberate, theatrical even, letting the weight of those words settle between us like a blade finding its target. His eyes never left my face as he delivered the coup de grace. They'll begin foreclosure proceedings to protect their investment. I picked up the pen and signed my name with the same careful precision I'd once used to cut keys. Each letter felt permanent, irreversible, like engaging the final gear in a mechanism that had been years in the making. Tom watched me sign with the focused attention of someone witnessing history. "There's one more thing," Tom said, watching me sign. His voice had taken on that careful tone lawyers use when they're about to deliver news that changes everything. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, and I could see excitement dancing behind his professional composure. "Given the amount of money you've invested in this property, the down payment, the monthly payments, all documented, you have grounds to file a lien against the property for reimbursement." I looked up from the paperwork, pen suspended mid-signature. A lien? A legal claim. Tom's explanation came faster now, his words carrying the enthusiasm of someone explaining a particularly beautiful chess move. "If the house gets sold, whether through foreclosure or private sale, you're first in line to recover your $108,000 before anyone else sees a penny." His expression was deadly serious now, but I could see satisfaction lurking in his eyes. "It's not just about getting you off the mortgage, it's about getting your money back." The second form he handed me was thicker, more complex. The paper felt substantial under my fingers, weighted with legal authority. I read through it carefully, noting how each clause was designed to protect my interests with the thoroughness of a master locksmith securing a vault. When I signed this one, I felt something shift inside me. Not satisfaction exactly, but the deep calm that comes from knowing you've used exactly the right tool for exactly the right job. Tom gathered both forms with movements that spoke of decades of practice, his fingers already reaching for his phone to call the filing clerk. "How long before they know?" I asked, sliding both forms back across the desk. Tom glanced at his watch, an old Rolex that had probably been a gift from a grateful client decades ago. His face carried the particular satisfaction of someone about to set a perfect trap. "I'll file these this afternoon. The bank will receive notification by tomorrow morning. Mason and Amelia will probably get their first call by Wednesday." I stood up, straightening my jacket with movements that felt more decisive than they had in months. Through Tom's window, I could see people going about their regular Tuesday, unaware that someone's entire foundation was about to develop some serious structural problems. "One more question," I said, pausing at the door. Tom looked up from organizing the paperwork, his expression expectant. "How long do they have to figure out an alternative?" Tom's smile was the expression of someone who just helped a friend install a particularly elegant piece of justice. He set down his pen and folded his hands, savoring the moment. 30 days from when the bank notifies them, assuming they get the call Wednesday. He did the math in his head, his eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. They'll need to have a solution by the time they get back from Hawaii. That's only 5 more days. I walked to my car, feeling lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly. This wasn't about happiness. It was about balance, about showing two people who'd forgotten the value of respect, exactly how much their disrespect was going to cost them. By the time I reached my house, the afternoon sun was painting everything in shades of gold. Somewhere in paradise, Mason and Amelia were about to discover that even in Hawaii, reality has a way of finding you. I made myself a sandwich and sat at my kitchen table, thinking about keys and locks and the fundamental truth that every system has a point of failure. The only question was whether you were smart enough to find it before someone else found yours. The next few days passed with the kind of peaceful routine I'd forgotten was possible. Wednesday morning, I made myself a proper breakfast. Eggs over easy, thick-cut bacon, coffee that I actually had time to savor. No frantic phone calls about emergencies, no requests to drop everything and solve someone else's crisis. Just the quiet satisfaction of a man whose calendar belonged entirely to himself. I spent the afternoon in my workshop, organizing tools that hadn't seen proper attention in months. Each wrench returned to its designated place, every screwdriver sorted by size and type. There was something deeply satisfying about systems that worked exactly as designed, where every component had its purpose and stayed in its assigned position. Thursday brought a call I'd been expecting. "They tried to reach you yesterday," Tom said, his voice carrying that particular mix of professional gravity and barely contained amusement. Multiple times, apparently. Amelia called the bank directly when they couldn't get through to you. I was sitting in my garden, watching a neighbor's cat stalk something in the bushes with single-minded determination. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face, and I had nowhere else to be. "I've been keeping my phone on silent." What did the bank tell them? Everything. Tom's laugh was sharp, satisfied. Credit requirements, income verification, the works. Apparently, Mason got quite agitated when they explained that without your co-signature, they don't qualify for a mortgage on a garden shed, let alone a 4-bedroom house. I could picture Mason's face perfectly, that particular shade of red he turned when reality didn't conform to his expectations. The image was more amusing than it probably should have been. "Any word on their next move?" I asked. "Panic, mostly. Amelia's been calling every few hours asking if there's been some kind of mistake. The bank very politely explained that there wasn't." Tom's voice took on that clinical tone lawyers use when describing someone else's legal dismantling. "They have until next Tuesday to either refinance independently or begin discussions about voluntary sale to avoid foreclosure proceedings." Next Tuesday. The day after they returned from paradise. Friday evening, my phone rang for the first time in 2 days. Amelia's name on the screen, calling from what I imagined was probably their resort balcony with the sunset painting everything in tropical colors. I let it ring 4 times before answering, making sure my voice carried just the right amount of relaxed contentment. "Hi, sweetheart. How's the vacation going?" "Dad." Her voice was tight, strained, lacking any of the carefree joy from her previous calls. I could hear Mason's voice in the background. Sharp, agitated, the sound of someone trying to solve a problem by talking louder. "We need to talk." "Of course," I said, settling deeper into my comfortable chair. "What's on your mind?" "The bank called us. They're saying something about you wanting off our mortgage and that we need to refinance and—" Her voice cracked slightly, and I could hear the exact moment she realized the enormity of what was happening. "Dad, they're saying we don't qualify on our own." I let the silence stretch for a moment, listening to her breathing grow more rapid. In the background, Mason's voice grew louder, more demanding. "That does sound complicated," I said finally. "What did you tell them?" "We told them there must be some mistake." The desperation in her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "You wouldn't do this to us. You're our dad, you're supposed to." The line went dead. I stared at the phone screen for a moment, noting the "call failed" message. Then I set it aside and returned to my book, a biography of a master locksmith from the 1920s who'd made his fortune helping people secure what mattered most to them. Saturday and Sunday passed in blissful silence. No calls, no emergencies, no demands for immediate solutions to problems that weren't mine to solve. I caught up on yard work, organized my garage, and even started planning a small vacation of my own. Maybe somewhere with good fishing and no cell phone service. Monday morning, I woke to the sound of rain pattering against my windows and the deep satisfaction of knowing that somewhere on an airplane, 2 people were about to discover that paradise vacations always end. By noon, I received a text from Tom. "It's done. Property secured as of 11 a.m. Bank moved faster than expected." I drove past their house around 2 o'clock, noting the official notices posted on the front door. Bright yellow papers that fluttered in the afternoon breeze like warning flags. The "Do Not Enter" tape across the entrance looked almost festive, like decoration for a celebration no one had been invited to attend. Their flight was scheduled to land at 6:30. I went home and made myself a quiet dinner, thinking about keys and locks and the fundamental truth that every system has a point of failure. Tonight, 2 people who'd forgotten the value of respect were about to discover that even the strongest locks are useless when someone else holds the master key. Somewhere across the city, a taxi was probably pulling up to a house where the keys no longer worked, where the lights wouldn't turn on, and where 2 people were about to learn the difference between living somewhere and actually belonging there. I raised my coffee mug in a small toast to the empty kitchen. then settled in to wait for what would undoubtedly be a very interesting phone call. The call came at 8:47 that evening, just as I was settling down with a glass of whiskey and the evening news. Amelia's name flashed on the screen, and I could practically feel the panic radiating through the phone before I even answered. Dad. Her voice was hollow, shell-shocked, like someone calling from the scene of an accident. Dad, we're standing outside our house and there are papers on the door. Yellow papers with legal language and we can't get in. I muted the television and leaned back in my chair, taking a slow sip of whiskey. Through my window, I could see the neighbor's porch light casting long shadows across their perfectly manicured lawn. That sounds serious, sweetheart. What kind of papers? I don't know. Her voice cracked, climbing toward hysteria. Something about foreclosure proceedings and bank seizure and, Dad, this has to be a mistake. This can't be real. Denial. Stage 1, right on schedule. I could hear Mason in the background, his voice a low rumble of disbelief and growing anger. The sound of someone rattling a door handle echoed through the phone, the futile gesture of a man who couldn't accept that his key no longer worked. Have you called the bank? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral and concerned but not surprised. Of course we called the bank. Mason's voice suddenly filled the phone as he grabbed it from Amelia. His words came out in sharp bursts, like verbal machine gun fire. They're saying you terminated the co-signing agreement. They're saying we don't qualify for the mortgage on our own. They're saying a bunch of legal bullshit that doesn't make any sense. Anger. Stage 2, arriving precisely as expected. I could picture Mason's face, that particular shade of red he turned when reality refused to bend to his will, veins probably standing out on his neck like cables under tension. Language, Mason, I said mildly. There are neighbors around. Don't you lecture me about language. His voice rose to a pitch that probably had every dog in the neighborhood perking up their ears. You did this. You sabotaged us while we were on vacation. What kind of sick, twisted... Let me talk to him. Amelia's voice came through muffled as she wrestled the phone back. I could hear them arguing in harsh whispers, the kind of desperate, angry discussion people have when their world is collapsing and they need someone to blame. Dad, Amelia's voice returned, but it was different now, smaller, more careful. She was moving into stage 3. Dad, please, there has to be some way to fix this. You're good at fixing things. You always have been. Can't you just call the bank and tell them this was all a misunderstanding? Bargaining. I took another sip of coffee and watched a jogger pass under the streetlight outside my window. Normal life continuing while two people discovered that some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired with good intentions and desperate pleading. I'm afraid that's not how legal documents work, honey, I said, letting genuine regret color my voice. Once they're filed, they take on a life of their own. But you filed them. Mason's voice exploded in the background. You can unfile them. Actually? No. I set down my coffee and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the dark street where somewhere a taxi had recently dropped off two people whose vacation was about to become a very expensive lesson. Legal proceedings, once initiated, follow their own timeline. The bank has to protect their interests now. Their interests? Amelia's voice climbed again, but this time it was edged with something sharper than panic. The first hint of real understanding was creeping in. What about our interests? What about the fact that this is our house? Our home? I felt something cold and precise shift into place in my chest, like the final tumbler clicking in a lock that had been years in the making. Your house, I repeated slowly, tasting each word. That's interesting, Amelia. Is that the same house where I was told I didn't have a voice? The same house where your husband runs things, not me? The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. In the background, I caught the sound of papers rustling, probably Mason reading the foreclosure notice for the 10th time, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something more palatable. Dad, that's not. We were just stressed. We didn't mean. Amelia's voice was smaller now, the voice of someone who was beginning to understand that words have consequences, that disrespect has a price that eventually comes due. Didn't mean what? I asked. my voice carrying the kind of quiet authority I'd once used to explain to customers why their broken locks couldn't be fixed with hope and good intentions. Didn't mean to tell me I had no voice in a house I was paying for. Didn't mean to treat me like hired help in my own daughter's home. Didn't mean to dismiss 8 months of mortgage payments and $108,000 in down payment money like it was pocket change. Each number hit like a hammer blow. I could hear Amelia's breathing grow shallow, rapid, the sound of someone realizing exactly how deep the hole they dug really was. Jesus Christ, Mason's voice came through, distant but audible. $108,000. Language, I said again, but this time there was steel in my voice. And yes, Mason, $108,000. The money that made your little paradise vacation possible. The money that bought you that house you're standing locked out of. The money you apparently forgot came with certain expectations. We'll pay you back. Amelia's voice was desperate now, grasping at straws like someone drowning. We'll get second jobs, we'll sell the cars, we'll do whatever it takes. Just please, Dad, please fix this. I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering a little girl who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting that Daddy could fix anything. That little girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who'd forgotten that respect was the foundation upon which all relationships were built. Amelia, I said quietly, and something in my tone must have carried through the phone, because the background noise stopped completely. Do you remember what you said to me right before you left? About who runs that house? The silence stretched like a cable under tension, ready to snap. Well, I continued, my voice steady and implacable as a closing vault door, it turns out you were wrong. The person who pays for something gets to decide what happens to it. The person whose credit made it possible gets to determine the terms. The person whose money keeps the lights on gets to choose who lives there. You can't do this. Mason's voice came through, but it lacked the anger from before. Now it just sounded hollow, defeated. This is our home. No, I said, and in that single word was the weight of every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every moment of disrespect I'd swallowed in the name of family harmony. This was my investment. My money, my credit, my risk. You just lived there. I could hear Amelia crying now, soft broken sounds that might have moved me a week ago. But I'd learned something valuable in the past few days. That kindness without boundaries wasn't kindness at all. It was just weakness wearing a smile. There's a motel about 6 miles south on Highway 9, I said, my voice carrying the finality of a door closing. They take credit cards. I suggest you call them before it gets too late. Dad, please. You taught me something important this week, I said, cutting her off. You taught me that blood doesn't guarantee respect, and that family is a privilege that has to be earned, not a right that can be taken for granted. I could hear Mason swearing in the background, his voice carrying the particular fury of a man who just realized he'd been playing a game where someone else held all the cards. But Amelia's voice, when it came, was different. Smaller. The voice of someone who was finally beginning to understand the true cost of her choices. What do we do now? She whispered. I looked around my quiet house, where every stick of furniture belonged to me, where no one questioned my voice or my authority, where respect wasn't a foreign concept. That, I said gently, is no longer my problem to solve. I ended the call and turned off my phone, then returned to my whiskey and the evening news. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and negotiations and the complex process of unwinding the financial entanglements that bound us together. But tonight, I just sat in my peaceful house and reflected on the fundamental truth that every locksmith learns eventually. Some doors, once closed, are never meant to be opened again. The person who controls the keys controls everything. And I just reminded 2 people who'd forgotten that lesson exactly how much power a single key could hold. 3 months later, I came across a small real estate listing in the classifieds. Foreclosure sale, 1247 Maple Drive, 4BR 3BA Colonial, bank motivated. The address was familiar, though the price was significantly lower than what it had been worth when I'd helped finance its purchase. Tom had handled the legal proceedings with his usual efficiency. The house had sold quickly, and I'd recovered my $108,000 plus interest and legal fees. Amelia and Mason had moved in with his parents across town. both working retail jobs now. But work had a way of teaching lessons that comfort never could. I'd been tempted to reach out to try and repair what had been broken. But every time I lifted the phone, I remembered Amelia's voice telling me I had no voice in their lives. I remembered being treated like hired help in a house I was paying for. Some lessons could only be taught through experience. And some relationships, once broken by disrespect, required more than apologies to repair. They required fundamental change. I wasn't angry anymore. That emotion had burned itself out, replaced by understanding. Love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was enabling. Family wasn't defined by blood alone, but by mutual respect and genuine care. The locksmith trade had taught me that security wasn't about building walls. It was about controlling access, about ensuring that those granted entry understood the value of what they'd been given. Family relationships operated on the same principles. Did I miss my daughter? Every day. Did I regret teaching her that actions have consequences? Not for a moment, because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling someone's worst impulses. Sometimes respect has to be demanded before it can be given. And sometimes the person who loves you most is the one who refuses to let you take that love for granted. The person who controls the keys doesn't just control access to buildings, they control access to their own peace, their own self-respect, and their own future. And sometimes the most important door you can close is the one that lets people walk all over you.